Welcome into a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always, and welcome to episode number 98. And for those of you who are keeping track, you know that means this Friday we will officially hit our 100th episode. I cannot believe that we are almost already at 100 episodes of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Looking back at whenever this thing started back in mid-July or towards the end of July in 2024, I was very nervous about doing my own show on a regular basis for the first time. And I know this isn't the most perfect show and far from it, but I've definitely enjoyed, learning things along the way and really getting used to being behind the microphone. And, we're just a few days away from that, and hopefully we'll be able to celebrate accordingly with something a little special. But we'll talk more on that as the week continues. But I got a lot to react to today. Going to react to the Darian DeVries introductory press conference that took place last week. I'm not going to go over everything bit by bit, but I'll just kind of share my thoughts on really how he portrayed himself and that sort of thing, and among some other stuff. And we're also going to have another first timer on the show today. It is none other than John Fanta from Fox Sports, and I'm very pleased to have him on the show. He wrote up something about new Indiana head coach Darian DeVries basically right after he was hired. And once I saw that, I was like, you know what? I know somebody who has a connection with John Fanta. So thankfully, that friend of mine gave me his contact information, and we connected, and now he's going to come on today's show. So I'm very excited about that. Also, normally I record the guest segments for those who are regular viewers of the show. Normally I record the guest segments before I do my solo stuff, and therefore tend to try to veer away from repeating myself. That is not the case today. I am doing the solo portion of the show before I record with John Fanta. So nonetheless, looking forward to having him on a little bit later. What else? We'll react to the NCAA Tournament and all that has taken place. We'll do that here in just a few minutes as well. Unfortunately, Indiana women's basketball, they already bowed out of their NCAA tournament run, made it to the round of 32. And we'll also take a look at the transfer portal as it officially opens today on Monday, March 24th. Will run until April 22nd. And that means if you're in the portal by April 22nd, you can stay in the portal until you commit to a school. But if you've missed out on declaring for the transfer portal by April 22nd, you can no longer do so without, of course, I'm sure with some sort of technicality that maybe could allow you to do that. You never know how the NCAA will allow random things every now and again. And then I'm also going to finally get to some of your YouTube comments. Over the last several episodes, including the live episode of talking about the Hoosiers, there's been plenty of reaction to Indiana's new basketball hire. And it's not that I've neglected using the comment section, but I've just kind of wanted it to build so I can kind of dedicate an entire portion of the show to just kind of reacting to different people's thoughts and feelings and opinions on Indiana's new head coach. So that we'll do that after the conversation with John Fanta. That'll be kind of how we wrap up things here today on a Monday. But glad to have you with me. I know Friday's show was a little bit different. I was very much, consumed with everything that was going on with March Madness. I felt like I initially thought that I wasn't going to be nearly as excited about everything going on with the NCAA tournament this year because Indiana, of course, is not in it. But this something about, I think just because we've known for a while now that Indiana was going to be moving on and doing something brand new, that even if Mike Woodson was unable to get this year's Indiana team to the big dance, we kind of were going to be able to enjoy it regardless, because I think we all knew that no matter what, the ceiling for this Indiana team was never going to be as high as we thought going into this past season. But either way, I've enjoyed the NCAA tournament, and I guess I'll save some of that here for just a moment. I want to go ahead and start with Darian DeVries and kind of my initial take on just not necessarily him as a coach, because I haven't really done a deep dive other than what we've already talked about, but more so just kind of his personality, how he kind of comes across from his 39, 40 minute wasn't just him. It was Scott Dolson and Pam Whitten. That entire press conference was fairly lengthy. But when it comes to Coach DeVries and what he's kind of all about, I think most fans, when you throw away or when you don't include the lack of championships and all the things that everybody likes to look in the ideal candidate, right? Guys like Scott Drew, basically anybody who's already won a national championship or been to a championship, won a final or gotten to a Final Four, all that stuff. We all know it's a lot more rare nowadays for programs to snatch up coaches who have those things on their resume. And because DeVries doesn't really have those, you just have to take everything else for what it is, right? So when you eliminate that thing, all of that stuff, eliminate that thing. That's a very educated, right? When you eliminate that part of it and you just kind of look at what he's all about, he's very process oriented. He said he's very much ready to adapt if he hasn't already to the modern style of basketball and the way that you construct a roster. I think those are things that should be very pleasing to Indiana fans, right? And another thing that I observed from Coach DeVries, especially I tend, and many of you know this by now, maybe some of you are like this as well, but I tend to compare the way that, or I tend to, I guess I compare everything to what Curt Cignetti does. It's probably not fair, but when you look at Coach DeVries, whenever he was doing his introductory press conference as opposed to what Cignetti was doing, he's definitely not, I don't want to say he's not comfortable behind a microphone because he did just fine answering questions. There were times where he was repetitive with his answer, but there were also a lot of questions given to him that were kind of the same thing, just worded a little bit differently. So I don't blame him for having a lot of samey answers and finding different ways to answer it or, give different angles, that sort of thing. But he doesn't hold court the way that Curt Cignetti does, and he doesn't have to. I try to make that clear whenever I make the Curt Cignetti comparisons for anything, just because I know he's not every coach, and many coaches, I should say, will not be anything like what Curt Cignetti is. But I think it's easy to want to drift into that lane because we've seen the success he had in year one in Indiana, of course. But I do think the fact that DeVries is process oriented, that's something that Cignetti was also. That's a very big thing for him. And when you don't deviate away from that process, I think that's something that Indiana fans will find comfort in. And if he's true to what he says, if he doesn't have any leniency toward that sort of thing, then finding the right players to create the team that you want to, I think that's going to only enhance his ability to have success in season one, right? Because we saw what Cignetti was able to do. I know I'm doing it again, but he brought in guys that, and I know DeVries probably isn't going to bring in his entire roster from West Virginia. It's not the same thing in that regard at all. But when you bring in those who are going to fit into your program and your system, that can often speed up the process of success, right? And speaking of success, I think one of the funniest or the best parts, if you will, and it was kind of a superficial thing that he mentioned, and it was kind of a phrase that maybe people will coin it and put it on a shirt if they haven't done so already. He said the banners will rise again after and before he had mentioned things that need to come together before that happens. But he finished that particular statement off with the banners will rise again. And I found that to be a nice little tagline to his speech that, again, if people have caught on to it or will catch on to it, maybe that's something that will be a nice little merchandise piece. Because I'd buy something that would say the banners will rise again. So if you're listening, Hoosiers Connect or anybody involved with the NIL space, home field apparel, whatever it may be, and maybe you've already done this, by the way, and I just haven't noticed it, but make a shirt or something that says the banners will rise again, because I'm down with that. What else? I think we'll get into your comments regarding DeVries later on in the show, as I mentioned earlier, and then we'll of course talk extensively with John Fanta on his thoughts and really what he expects the DeVries era to be like, because I really appreciated, as I'm backtracking here for a second, I really appreciated Dustin Schuette's perspective last Friday when we had him on, because one thing that I think needs to kind of, what's the best way to phrase this? the way that fans kind of assume that everything, and I've fallen into this boat sometimes too, so I'm not trying to disassociate from this, but the way that a lot of fans over the last several years have kind of evaluated success, I think we need to slowly move away from just assuming that if a coach doesn't get to a Final Four, that they're not a good head coach. And of course, if you're Indiana, you want to find somebody who at least has that ceiling. Now, well, if they ever achieve it, I guess that remains to be seen. But I think whenever we're looking for success with somebody like DeVries, I think if he can get Indiana to the tournament every single year comfortably, and you'll have some off years now and again where maybe you're on the bubble and things don't go your way the way. And I'm not saying that should happen regularly because that's what was going on with Mike Woodson. But if you have 5 years where you make the NCAA tournament comfortably, and then the 6th year is, you're on the bubble and that sort of thing, and then you go back to, 3 or 4 in a row where you're in comfortably, I don't think that's something people should worry about it. And then on top of that, I think, yes, if you're Indiana, you should be able to expect to regularly be in the second weekend. Will it always happen? Probably not. But beyond that, getting to the Final Four, that requires a little bit of luck involved sometimes. You have to have favorable matchups. You have to have, everything come together in the right time. Sometimes you just have to be hot. Like, that's just the way the NCAA tournament works. If you're a hot team and you have all the momentum on your side, that can be, a recipe for success, whether you're Indiana or somebody else. But I think getting to the second weekend should really be the benchmark for any big time program. Now, if you're, I was going to go off a branch further, but I think we should just really kind of keep it at that point. So I guess my point being with all of this, Indiana's regular, like the baseline right now, or every year for Indiana is to be comfortably in the tournament. And I mean by like that, if you can be anywhere between really a 7 seed or better every year. And of course, you'd love to be better than that as often as you can. But I'd say most 7 seeds and better are teams that are comfortably in the NCAA tournament for, the majority of the season. You're not sweating out the bubble or that sort of thing. If you can be in that range and consistently make deep tournament runs, second weekend most of the time and sometimes better, I think that's what Indiana should be looking for, as well as, being in the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten. Dustin Schutte mentioned that as well, and finding ways to win the Big Ten championship. And Tom Crean, if we're going back another step further, Tom Crean did a lot of that. The problem was there were just too many gap years that were just out of the ordinary. Indiana would have a really good season, and then things would really drop off for a year and sometimes 2. And then it would take a bit to kind of get things back up to where they needed to be. And so it was very, very much a roller coaster with Tom Crean. You had the best of the best, and then some of the lower times, including the lowest of the low with the 6-win season. Now, that's not necessarily his fault, but, it's just the way things unfortunately played out during his tenure with what happened before that. But that's kind of where expectations lie now. I think the way they should be kind of tempered a little bit. And if we're looking at year one specifically, and I'm saying this without looking at what the roster looks like, because we don't know what it'll look like. But I think I just feel like some people may listen to this and think you're just saying exactly what Dustin Schutte said. But I think I'd always kind of thought this, but didn't never really articulate it just because I always wanted expectations to be higher. But if DeVries can just lay a solid foundation and, I was going to say kind of just have a fun season, but, fun is different for everybody. You want to be competitive. I think you want to do a few things. You want to win some key games. You want to defend home floor, and you want to avoid the embarrassing losses. I think those things are key to having a good foundational year with any head coach. Like you just don't want to get blown out by anybody. You want to be competitive in every game. And it doesn't mean you're going to not everything's going to be a 3 or 4 point loss. You may lose some by 10 or 11 points or whatever, but you've got to avoid the embarrassing, effortless style losses, right? Like that's something that has to be gone in this new era of Indiana basketball. So I think I've kind of said my initial piece or thoughts on where things are at. I'm excited about this new era of Indiana basketball. I think like many of you didn't expect Darian DeVries to be the new head coach, but that's exactly, we said this before during the coaching search. that we need to not be surprised when Scott Dolson finds his guy and it's somebody that no one was really talking about before the day he was hired. We can't be that surprised if he goes that route. And that is exactly what happened. So we'll go ahead and we'll talk more about that, like I said earlier, with John Fanta, and then I'll respond to some of your YouTube comments on the new hire as well. But I want to go ahead and move on from that here for just a little bit. And I want to go ahead and react to some NCAA tournament stuff before we get into our conversation with John Fanta. I know a lot of people have kind of observed this tournament as kind of being one of the, I don't want to say least exciting, but maybe some people think that, but it's definitely one of the least chaotic NCAA tournaments that we've really seen in quite some time. And is that due to, the shift of, is the NIL and the transfer portal finally balancing some things out, or more like unbalancing things? Because it felt like a lot of the, when I say higher seeds, a lot of the less good team. I hate when we say higher seed and lower seed and we don't know which context it is. Does higher mean better, or does higher mean the number is higher? Because I never know which lane to go in there. We'll just say double-digit seeds. You see less double-digit seeds, coming down to the wire with the favorites. And of course, the favorites would rather see that play out, right? But the fact that we only had, 2 double-digit seeds advanced past the round of 64 we had 3. McNeese, Colorado State, who nearly beat Maryland, and then Drake, who was an 11 seed. They won their first game before bowing out against Texas Tech. And I guess you could throw Arkansas as a double-digit seed, but I'm kind of more so referring to the mid-majors and low majors and getting, far in the tournament. I think, we've made it to the Sweet 16, and by this portion of the tournament, the worst seed left in the field is Arkansas at number 10. And so, this has been a very underwhelming March Madness whenever it comes to, the craziness. All of the 1 seeds are still intact. A lot of the, not a lot of the regions, but we have one region that's gone chalk: Houston, Purdue, Kentucky, and Tennessee in the Midwest. In the West, you've got 1, 4, and 3 who still made it in, St. John's being the one that did not. I guess that's technically a little bit of chaos, but considering it's John Calipari in Arkansas who defeated them, I don't think that's as shocking. Same thing, like if UConn would have defeated Florida the other day, even though a lot of people think Florida may be the favorite to win the national championship, could we have really been surprised if 2-time defending national title winner Dan Hurley and UConn would have beaten Florida? No, we wouldn't have been as surprised. Maybe initially like, wow, Dan Hurley still has it even after a mediocre season, and we would have moved on and been like, okay, it's just a Dan Hurley coached UConn team. But that wouldn't have been as surprising. What else we got? In the South region, you've got 1, 2, and then 5 and 6. You've lost the 4 and the 3 with Iowa State and Texas A&M. And then over in the East, you got 1, 4, and 2. The 3, which was Wisconsin, lost in that region. So it's a fairly chalky, Sweet 16, but there's still room for some upper level teams to make it into the national or into the Final Four. By the way, sorry, I was earlier. I'm very stun lock myself for just a moment. We were talking earlier on the show that I work at in the mornings about the chance for Arkansas and Kentucky to meet in the Final Four. And just because that would be cool to see John Calipari and Kentucky face off. But that wouldn't even happen until the national championship. Why did we get that wrong? Either way, that is neither here nor there. But overall, I guess it's been a fun tournament to watch. I've been making some bets. I've been doing some parlays for the first time in a while. And what do you know? I've had a couple that have gone 2 of 3 as they usually go for me. Already made my parlay for the Thursday games. I don't have it right in front of me, so I won't share it off the top of my head, but maybe I'll share that on Wednesday before the game starts. I also did so somebody at my other job also inspired me to do something a little, I don't know, it's not really off the wall, but just something a little more just different than what I usually do when it comes to betting. And they took somebody who would not really be at all a favorite to win the national championship, and just bet $5 on them to win the whole thing just in case. And they took Xavier to win. I think it would have $5 would have paid out at $2,000, and I put $5 on Oregon to win. And man, I was watching a little bit of that Oregon Arizona game last night before I fell asleep. Was really hoping Oregon would pull it out and keep that bet alive, but unfortunately they bowed out to Arizona. So Oregon winning the whole thing would have got me $1,000, but hey, that's why I would have paid out so much. It was unlikely to happen. So one more thing before we wrap up and move on to John Fanta. I do want to mention the Indiana women's team. They bowed out in the round of 32. I know I did that earlier, but in their first game, they defeated Utah 76-68. And they actually put up a pretty decent fight against one of the best, if not the best teams in women's college basketball in South Carolina. They lost 64-53. And, just an unfortunate draw. And Dawn Staley had said afterward, the South Carolina head coach, like, Terry Morin just needs a little more luck on her side. She does a lot of good things. She's done a lot of great things, as a matter of fact, with Indiana. She just needs to have a more, favorable draw just to kind of get a little more momentum in the NCAA tournament instead of having to face these really tough teams in the early going. And then one thing, a quick shout out to Sports Fan 938. He tends to always be in the comments helping correct me whenever I say something wrong when it comes to the women's college basketball. Because I had mentioned that Indiana would be traveling out to Utah. That was not the case. The entire region was or at least that section of the region was in South Carolina. Apparently it's been that sort of setup for the last few years, but again, shows exactly what I know, which sometimes maybe absolutely nothing. But thank you, Sports Fan 938, for correcting me on that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and continue our conversation on new Indiana men's basketball hire, Darian DeVries. And I'm very pleased to welcome him for the first time, Mr. John Fanta. Joining me for the first time here on In Touch with Indiana Sports, it is Fox Sports' John Fanta. It is a pleasure to have you on.
Well, John, it's great to be with you. It's a pleasure to be on In Touch with Indiana Sports. You do a terrific job, and I know how much excitement there is in Bloomington for the Darian DeVries era, and with everything happening in Bloomington, with what Coach Cignetti has been building, and just everything in between. And love what you do. I was in Bloomington in the fall. I was so impressed by both campus and the pulse of everybody in the community. So a pleasure to be with you, my friend. Happy March to all of those tuning in.
And it's been fun to watch, even though Indiana's not. It's been fun to watch the NCAA tournament from afar, but I did see that you were a little fed up yesterday, I believe, with people just kind of complaining about the lack of chaos this year. Have you still been able to enjoy, even though there's a lot of people complaining about things going on?
Well, I think that part of the allure of March Madness is having Cinderellas, and not having a Cinderella it's tough. It is tough, and that is a negative on this particular tournament. Do I think that we'll never see a Cinderella again? Come on. Just because of NIL, I think we're going to see some regulation over the next couple of years with rev sharing. So you're going to see some sort of a cap. But two, some of these mid-major programs, John, are spending more money than some of the high majors. What happens if the ball bounces a certain way and Colorado State wins? Would the argument then be, well, they're from the Mountain West. That's still a really big league. It's not like they're a true Cinderella. Yeah, but they haven't been in the Sweet 16 in years. It'd be a great story. We came that close. McNeese knocked off. They came out and beat the doors off Clemson, right? Drake. They had a year that wasn't reminiscent of a Cinderella, but they commanded Missouri. We will see mid-majors continue to find a way. It's just not the case here. I'm going to give you a stat. To all the people who are like, top-heavy tournament, no Cinderellas. In 2015 and 16, the only non-power conference, I count the Big East, only non-power conference teams to make the NCAA tournament, it was Gonzaga. That's it, John. And they're basically a power conference team. So we went 15 and 16 without a Cinderella in the Sweet 16. And now everyone's like, oh, first time ever. First. Well, Gonzaga, it's not that much of a difference. So I think that it is a negative with this particular tournament. I don't want it to be year in and year out. I think the gap is widening. I don't love that for the sport because of NIL dollars.
Yeah.
But I still think the tournament's going to deliver the drama. I still think you're going to see great games. And I think you could see an epic Final Four with all of the powerhouse programs that are still alive.
And that's the thing, like, even though the Cinderella names aren't left in this NCAA tournament, you can still get more buzzer beaters. And a lot of people are complaining about the Maryland buzzer beater, the way in which it happened. We won't get into that right now, but there's still plenty of tournament left for a lot of good moments.
People complaining about that. Come on. That was an incredible shot. And what a move towards – nobody takes that shot anymore. Derek Queen is a throwback player. He's got some Moses Malone skills to him. Not saying he's Moses, but he plays the game like him. And that was just – it was outstanding. You can both say that you would like Cinderella while also saying that the better tournament, for the sake of the tournament, for the sake of crowning a champion, it's better when we see the heavyweights face off because they've been the best in the sport all year. Yeah. So you could say both things. Just because we don't have a Cinderella doesn't mean now the whole tournament's boring and this, that, and the third. Get ready. We're just getting started in this thing, and somebody still has to win 4 games to win it all. And honestly, that's going to be crazy to see because of the level of competition here.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to look forward to, but I want to go ahead and get into the real reason, or the main reason, that I brought you on, and that is, of course, to talk about Indiana's new head coach, Darian DeVries. And I kind of wanted to start with this. Did you expect Indiana to go in this direction? Because everyone was throwing out Ben McCollum. I mean, Brad Brownell was a serious candidate at one point. You could throw basically everybody out there except for who it ended up being Darian DeVries was named at one point or another, I felt like. And I'm just curious if you saw it going in a direction like this at any point.
Well, I didn't, because he had taken a job in the Big 12. And I thought 1 year in, typically agents try to steer their clients from leaving a job of that nature after a year. But this is one of the defining brands and programs in college basketball. This isn't West Virginia. And Mountaineer fans might be upset with that, but this is Indiana. Indiana's on a different pedestal, a different level, different money, different NIL. Yeah, higher expectations. But for Darren, this is a guy who's a Midwesterner. He's from Iowa. And he's got an elite mind for the game. And I think that Scott Dolson and the Indiana Brass deserve a lot of credit for kind of keeping this under the hat and going through this process quietly as they did. Here's what you need to know about Darren. What did Dana Altman say? That D-Rock came to work for him. He was just getting married to his wife, Ashley, and he's a great basketball coach. He's really energetic and an elite basketball mind. And Dana then said the Big Ten just got a little better because he's really, really good. So I think that epitomizes him. You know, Greg McDermott has said he's the epitome of a grinder, and he has a way of connecting with people. John, if you were to look at 2 qualities in the Indiana basketball coach, roll up your sleeves and grind. And number 2, can you connect with the community? It's like Tom Crean told me. I know some IU fans, I know everybody's got a different feeling. But Tom Crean said, when I got to Indiana, I knew I had to touch people, meaning I had to get out in the community and tell people about our program, tell them what we're building, get them to relate. You know, you have to have a front-facing role. Darren might not be this through-the-roof energy Bruce Pearl, you know, or a Dan Hurley or a Tom Izzo character. But, John, his job is to win games.
Yeah.
His job is to show what Indiana basketball is all about. And last I checked, this guy is 169-68 as a head coach with multiple trips to the big dance. 3 of them.
It took Drake 3 times, and I think before that had Drake only been a couple of times in their entire history or something like that?
Yeah. Like, he made history at Drake. He put them through their greatest run, and that run continued this year under Ben McCollum, who now Iowa hires. You feel for Drake, but you understand that these are really strong coaches who now are out to prove something. You're getting a guy on the rise. You're getting a guy who's ascending. who hasn't had his best coaching, yet. I think he's got even better coaching in front of him. And he could be at Indiana for the next 20 years. He's 49 right now. He's worked his ass off to get here. I think he's ready. I love this hire. I think it makes a lot of sense for IU.
I think a lot of people can look at what Louisville and Kentucky did an offseason ago with Pat Kelsey and Mark Pope and kind of draw comparisons with this. I think a lot of people on both sides with Louisville and Kentucky were very unhappy with the direction that they went initially. Now, of course, you look at the seasons that both of those programs have had. Of course, Louisville bowed out a little earlier than many people on that fan base would have liked, but they had a hell of a season. Second place in the ACC. Kentucky's in the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2019. Both of those fan bases were initially kind of indifferent. They didn't really know what to think. They were trying to be optimistic, but maybe they weren't as happy as they would have been if they gotten somebody that was a bigger name. But we've seen firsthand now that you can do things in year one with somebody who maybe doesn't have the NCAA tournament experience and wins that one might expect for a blue blood type of job.
No, that's it. But John, the game has changed. Here's the thing in Indiana. Here's the thing. You could be any coach, and they're going to be committed in the NIL space. They're going to be. Why? They want to win championships. They want to hang banners. It means something else. It's also a testament, John, that whether you win or lose the press conference, you got to win games. Nobody remembers the press conference now. I mean, we do with Mark Pope. He brought the Untouchables team off the bus in Rupp Arena.
Yeah.
And that energy is translating to his team. He did a terrific job in the portal. Now, how does he recruit this offseason? And do we see him pursue more freshmen? Do we see him be a portal king? Todd Golden, portal, dominated the portal. Now his team's a 1 seed. You got to do it differently nowadays. You can't just win with 1 or 2 freshmen or 3 freshmen. As for Cal, it's kind of unbelievable. It's unbelievable that that's panned out with Arkansas. They were 0-5 in the SEC. They looked buried. Their best 2 players on Saturday in the win over St. John's were Billy Richmond and Carter Knox, 2 freshmen. All the credit to him. He's motivated. I do want to get a coach who's got a chip on their shoulder, something to prove. And I think Darren has something to prove. I think Mark Pope had something to prove. And I think John was motivated because everybody's like, he won because of Kentucky. Now he can win. Now can he do it at Arkansas? Well, he's got him in the Sweet 16. That's pretty good. In college basketball today, I want a guy who's going to work just as hard with or without the money he has. Darren's work ethic isn't going to change because it's Indiana and he's got more resources than Drake or West Virginia. That's why this is a money hire.
What do you think? Because, I'm sure you're very well aware of this. A lot of Indiana fans are very impatient. And I think as more coaches have come and gone, the impatience level has risen. And it seems like they give coaches less time to do anything in Bloomington. What do you think the baseline expectation should be for DeVries in year one?
Make the NCAA tournament and win a game.
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't think it should be, hey, let's make the Sweet 16 right away.
Yeah.
You see what happens, but make the NCAA tournament, win a game. And he's going to have the resources to do that. The Big Ten's deep enough. There's so many resume opportunities. He's going to play. I mean, let's look at the facts here. Like you have to look at it before we do anything. You're going to play 18 to 22 quad 1, quad 2 games. You're probably going to play 17 or 18 quad 1 games. Another 5 or 6 in quad 2. In quad 1, you come out and win 6 or 7 of them, and you don't have any major blemishes, you're going to get in. You're going to get in the tournament. So, or at least you probably should get in the tournament, and you have a decent enough conference performance. Indiana won 4 this year. You and I both know, John, if they turn the 4-13 quad 1 record into 6-11, they're in.
Yeah.
They were 1 win away. So, I think that would be it. It would be make the NCAA tournament, get a win in the NCAA tournament, and then let's take it from there.
I had a conversation with somebody else the other day who was a Purdue fan, as a matter of fact, and they were talking about how fan bases in general, like the expectations for the Blue Bloods always needing to make a deep NCAA tournament run. Like that kind of needs to be like the NCAA tournament can kind of be a crapshoot, right? Because there's a little bit of luck involved. The matchups have to be in your favor, and to expect, it doesn't matter. You can name Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, Indiana. It doesn't matter. To expect to go to a Final Four every single season would be nonsense. To go to the second weekend every year, like maybe that can be something you hope happens and maybe should happen for most really, really good programs, but it's not always going to happen. You may fall victim to one of the unfortunate upsets every once in a while. So do you think, tournament expectations should be kind of tempered down a little bit, or maybe that's too far-fetched or something like that?
Tournament expectations at Indiana?
To consistently be in the Final Four, because there's only 4 teams every year that can make the Final Four.
That's too much. That's too much. My expectation for a program like Indiana, when they're humming, make the Sweet 16, and then take it from there. You might have a year that you walk into and say, our expectation is to be in the Final Four and win a national championship. John, it's very hard to think that way every single year, unless it's plastered in your face at Duke, and probably at Kansas. But how's Kansas done the last 2 years? 1 tournament win with Hunter Dickinson. It also goes to show you, I'm going to share this with people. You're going to get excited by your off-season additions. Do not proclaim anything until you see the team step on the floor. I don't get too high or too low on how an off-season goes. And continuity is important in college basketball. It really is. It can get you in the tournament by December if you have roster continuity, because you will win November and December games when other teams are trying to figure their stuff out. You'll know. You'll know what your team is. You'll know who you are. That matters. Indiana should be thinking, how do we make the Sweet 16 every year? And then at that point, if we've got the roster, let's talk Final Four. But if you're saying Final Four every single year, that's not realistic. That's not fair. That's not fair. And when you look at it, like, it's hard. It's Duke hasn't won a title in a decade. Carolina's been schizophrenic the past couple of years. Indiana hasn't made an Elite Eight since 2002.
Yeah.
They've made the second weekend 3 total times since 2002. And now we're expecting Final Four. Let's make the Sweet 16 before we start thinking Final Four.
Who on this current roster for Indiana? I know that the portal opened today. Who do you kind of see fitting into the Darian DeVries equation if anyone sticks around?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I assume Miles Rice. I haven't seen his name pop up anywhere. I would try to keep him.
The only 2 that have put their names in so far are Malik Renew and Gabe Cupps, unless something's happened and I haven't noticed it just yet.
Right.
Those are the only 2 that have put their names in.
Ballo's done, obviously.
As of right now, Indiana has 8 to 9 roster spots open due to some leaving for eligibility. And then Luke Goody may get a medical red shirt. I'm not too sure, but Indiana does have a lot of spots to fill already.
I would say Miles Rice. I would say Luke Goody if you can. And I would say Mackenzie Mbaka. I mean,
it's a good trio.
That's who else on this roster has truly shown that there's something to be said about them right now. And I mean, it doesn't mean you can't keep them for your program and for, as you said, a foundation if you like them.
Yeah.
But is there somebody else that you would really, advise keeping? I mean, what's the deal with Tucker?
Yeah, the way that he just kind of vanished in the last portion of the season was very interesting. I'm not too sure what will happen with him.
Yeah. Look, if they could keep him, I still think there's upside with him. I just don't think that the last staff tapped into him. If I'm being honest, I think the last staff didn't tap into a lot of things. And look, that's why it ended the way it did. I mean, it ended the way it did because they didn't get the most out of the players that they paid for.
Yeah.
Didn't.
Last thing I'll ask you, who do you foresee? And again, there'll be hundreds of players in the portal, but is there anybody just off the top of your head that you think other than Tucker DeVries that will be a good fit at Indiana from a different team?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting because we have to see how the portal really evolves.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
a lot of the really coveted players are still, of course, playing in the
yeah,
NCAA
they're
tournament
still
right now.
playing in the tournament. They're still playing in the tournament, but doesn't mean that there couldn't be, a few guys. I mean, we'll see. Like, we got to see what happens with the portal at like a Villanova that's now opened up, or a Xavier that's now opened up, and whether or not we'll see, some level of movement or not. I don't know, what we're going to see across the board in this sport because everything is so incredibly fluid. But I think that it's a little too early to tell exactly like who would be the best portal target. But I think shooting, I think Luke Goody's not the only shooting option that makes that fills everything off
Yeah.
the board. I'll be curious to see what Dalen Swain does at Xavier. He was a sophomore. He could help Indiana. If he transferred to Indiana, that's a guy from Xavier that could really help them. Will we see Iowa? Will we see any roster movement there? But like John, there's nobody there that I'm like, yep, got to go there. Like he's got to be the guy. I think it's a little early to tell. I mean, the other job that's interesting is like a VCU. If Ryan Odom doesn't take a bunch of those types of players, are we in a world where if somebody can get extra eligibility, we see someone move on from there and potentially be out in the fray? It's tough. It's tough to know, but I think you're going to see Darian DeVries try to cross everything off. And remember in the Big 12, he was just in the Big 12, so he knows that league quite well. And who knows what could happen in that conference? Still with some turnover, still with some change.
Yeah.
But I think when you've been at Drake and you've been at West Virginia the last 2 years, you got a lot of contacts in a lot of leagues that's going to help you identify talent. I would want 3-point shooting. I want to address things with a big man, but it's a little too early to say, like, this is the guy they've got to go get.
That's fair. Last thing I'll ask you, and then I'll let you go. What would just kind of be your overall message to Indiana fans who, there's going to be a lot of question marks, like you said, until you actually see the team hit the floor nearly a year from now?
My message to Indiana fans?
Yeah.
My message to Indiana fans is get revved up. Get revved up because Darian DeVries is going to bring a winner to Indiana. He's going to work for it. This is not a guy who's going to be overwhelmed by the job or by the brand because he's going to grind. He has worked his entire life for this. He has worked his entire life for this spotlight and for this stage. When you work for Dana Altman and Greg McDermott, two of the elite offensive technicians in the game, look where their teams are at every year. Round of 32, Sweet 16. Greg McDermott told me, and Doug McDermott, his son, told me too, nobody is going to outwork Darren. Nobody. John, that's who I want as my head coach. If you're an Indiana fan, get excited. You pack Assembly Hall whether your team's great or bad. I respect that out of these fans. Get ready for a new style. A style that says we've got a top 30 to 35 defense in the sport because they guard. They can shut teams down offensively with the way that they defend. And Darren's teams have done that. They've shut offenses down. They can turn the water off quickly. They're going to guard. They're going to take the right shots. Look at their shot charts when he starts coaching them. You're going to see less mid-range. You're going to see 2s and 3s. Interior 2s and 3s. I'm excited. IU fans, I can't wait to see you. I'm not just saying it. You make college basketball better with your passion. And I think Darian DeVries will embrace that fully.
He's John Fanta from Fox Sports. I appreciate your time, and hopefully I'll have you on again in the future.
Thank you so much, John. Happy to join you anytime. Love your work.
A big thank you to John Fanta for giving me a few minutes of his time, and we'll I don't know when we'll check in with him again. Hopefully we'll eventually get a chat with him sometime in the future, probably when we get closer to next basketball season, but very much appreciate him giving him a few moments of his time to discuss Indiana's new basketball coach. And now we'll continue talking about that with you guys. We're going to check out some of your comments on the good old YouTube's comment section. And I'm going to rattle through a lot of these. I'll respond to several of them as well, but I do want to get through as many of these as possible. So we'll start here with Mike. Again, I'm kind of just going in the order that I see them. So I'm not necessarily going from negative to positive or vice versa. I'm just going with the order that they are presented to me here. So Mike, and I don't really know what the last part of his username says, but Mike says, DeVries had the exact same record as Mike Woodson. So we are replacing one mediocre coach for another. Now, not all records are alike. We got to throw that out there first, right? Because many people, for one, thought that West Virginia deserved to be in the tournament considering the amount of good wins that they had. And you also got to throw out there the success he's had in previous stops, especially when you look at Drake, right? He was at Drake before West Virginia. Before he arrived as the head coach at Drake, I don't know. I heard Dolson mention this. I wish I'd wrote the number down, but the amount of NCAA tournament appearances that Drake had made before he got there was very small, and he got them to 3 during his 6 years there. Now, again, ideally, you would have loved to have him make it every single year, but again, it's the Missouri Valley where you typically only get one team in from that league. So if you're not the absolute best, then it's a lot more difficult to get an at-large bid. And even if you are the best, like Indiana State was last year, if you miss out winning your conference tournament, you may get snubbed just because it's that difficult to get an extra bid in the Missouri Valley. So just wanted to throw that in right there. Steve says, "Go Hoosiers, really good hire." Mike Shenanigans says, "I am with the hire. I am glad the time is over so fast and getting a new coach because time is of the essence of the portal opening. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned earlier, portal opens today. We'll definitely react as each episode goes on to the different portal happenings that end up taking place. Again, at the time of this recording, I don't believe anybody other than Malik Renew and Gabe Cups have officially entered the portal for Indiana. That may change by the time this episode is released. So if something does happen and you guys want to be my comments, say, you forgot this person. It's not that I forgot it. It's that the episode just got posted after it was announced. So again, at the time of this recording, Renew and Cups, currently the only Indiana guys who have jumped in the portal. But back to what Mike Shenanigans was saying. He said, "Time will also tell if this is the right hire. I have faith in Dolson after Sig to do this. Go IU. Love the show. Good insight." Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you as always. Yeah, we're going to find out again quickly if things are going to mesh well. That's kind of the beauty, kind of a double-edged sword when it comes to how quickly you can turn things around, because it does create a lack of patience with fan bases as well. And we already know that the Indiana basketball fan base is impatient as it is. But I do think what I laid out earlier in the show is important for fans to remember. Like, there's got to be some level of patience. Like, I think expecting Indiana to be comfortably in the tournament in year one, I think that is a fine expectation. But there's no reason for anyone to expect DeVries to immediately win the Big Ten or go to a Final Four. Can those things happen? Sure. I mean, exactly. Like Curt Cignetti doing what he did. No one expected that to happen. A lot of people thought like a great season for Cignetti in year one would have been like 8-4, 7-5. And people would have even been happy with 6-6. And so lowering the expectations for year one, it allows for things to be more enjoyable for one thing. I know that's not necessarily, I guess that's ultimately what we want to do, right? Is enjoy the season, but it allows you to lay a foundation. And I know I'm kind of repeating myself from earlier in the show, but it's still important to not immediately expect things to be, Indiana to rise to be the cream of the crop. They can work their way towards that, but I think it's comfortable to expect or it should be a comfortable expectation for Indiana to be in the tournament next year. So thank you, Mike, again for the comment. Agent All-Star 7 says, all we can do is hope now. Exactly. There's nothing else. I mean, that's all you can do in general is hope when you're a fan. There's nothing we can do other than, shout out into the ether out here on the interwebs about what we're unhappy about. But yeah, that's all we can do right now is hope. Indy Nation 6317 says Dolson didn't hire Woodson. Buckner and Stevenson, two trustees, used their power to hire Woodson. Dolson wanted Mata. I do remember, reports several years ago, a few years ago, whenever Woodson ended up being hired, that it was originally going to be Thad Mata, other than having some health issues. So maybe, I do think there's some truth to that. I wasn't, a part of the insiders of all of that. So I don't really know what's true or what's not about all that, but it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. NSPR 8586 says, great hire. Welcome Coach DeVries and his son. Yes, of course, Tucker DeVries going to be on the roster next year and could make probably will be expected to make a huge impact on next year's team. Dabney Offerman says, wow, that style of play sounds like a pig through molasses, but still looking forward to seeing what he can do. Not the Rick Pitino that we needed or Chris Beard, but let's see what transfers he brings in. You're referring to whenever Kyler and I were looking at his statistics from this past season in West Virginia, where they had, I think they were 343rd in offense overall, if I remember correctly. And again, some of that can be attributed to having some key players out of their rotation due to injury and that sort of thing. So, but I do think, if he wants to construct a roster differently at Indiana than the way he did at West Virginia, I don't think we should necessarily expect Indiana to have a super slow offense. I think it'll be a very balanced, offense and defense will be equally as important with this new era of Indiana basketball. And you'll definitely see more of an emphasis on 3-point shooting. I do think there is definitely an obsession right now amongst a big portion of the fan base of like, oh my gosh, we've got to shoot more threes. Why aren't we shooting more threes? We got to make more threes, to the point where it kind of aggravates me sometimes. Like, for me, it's just score the basketball. Like, if you're finding ways to score efficiently, whether it be twos or threes, I don't care what it is. Now, I know, a three is worth more than a two. Like, I understand simple math, how that works. But I do think, and maybe this is a bad take, but I do think that fans in general are overtly obsessed with the amount of 3-pointers that need to be taken. Take good shots, take shots that are, highly efficient shots. But at the same time though, I do agree that the volume of 3-pointers should increase regardless, just because there were points during the last several seasons where you're just kind of like, why aren't they? Like, I know you have to have the shooters to want to shoot those threes, and that's part of it. At the same time, like, you kind of have to, don't be afraid to take one every once in a while. And I don't think that'll be the case with Darian DeVries and the way he wants to play. So we'll see. I don't think we should be over. Like, if Indiana's not shooting 33s a game, I don't think we should be worried about that. I think if they're shooting 20 to 25, and in some cases more or less, I think that's probably a normal expectation. And I'm sure many of you will want them to hit them as well. So, there's no point in taking them if you're not hitting them. But yeah, thanks. Good stuff from you as well, Dabney, on the comments section. Let's see what else we've got here. This is Monroe County IU fan. He or she said would very much not want to hear a deep dive into anything Purdue is doing. Fast forwarded right through it. And yeah, you were referring to Friday's show whenever I had, of course, our good friend Dustin Schutte on. He covers Purdue. And, that's fine. It's not your cup of tea to listen to Purdue talk. As an Indiana fan, I totally get it. I'm not a fan of Purdue myself, but I am a fan of my friend Dustin Schutte. He does a great job covering the Boilermakers. And we didn't just talk Purdue stuff. And I know you said you fast forwarded to the part where we talked about DeVries and the like, but we talked more than just Purdue when it came to the NCAA tournament. But again, I totally understand. And, I'm glad you still listen, though, Mr. or Mrs. Monroe County IU fan. Mike Shenanigans was also happy to see Dustin again. And then last one we'll do here. This is from Steve Radcliffe. And I'm glad I saved this one for the end. He says, so what's this? I'm hearing that Indiana tampered with Darian DeVries while he was still the head coach at West Virginia. Is there any truth to this story? And then he says, myself, I like the hire other than the rumors going around about tampering. And again, this may or may not have already been confirmed by somebody else. It wouldn't surprise me if it has been. But you're more than likely referring to the clip, if you haven't seen this already, Steve. There was a clip that went around from the press conference where it was one of the first was the first question he was asked. It was from Zach Osterman. And I don't remember exactly what the question was, but Coach DeVries had mentioned that he said that Indiana, the administration was very, accommodating when it came to letting him finish out his season in West Virginia, and like mentioning that, like, while the season was going on, like, hey, you can focus on your season. And it makes people think like, oh, were they already in contact with each other midway through the season? Did Indiana know from nearly the get-go that they were going to be hiring Darian DeVries? While everybody was throwing out Scott Drew and Brad Stevens. I can't believe I just said it without even saying he who shall not be named. Everybody's throwing out the typical home run hires that you would expect. When again, as we all know, Scott Dolson likes to move to the beat of his own drum and doesn't really care what people think on the outside. And he shouldn't. He should do exactly what he wants to do. But here I'll say this. I don't think Indiana did anything wrong. And again, I don't know exactly how it was handled. And maybe the way that DeVries worded it, maybe we're not getting the full context of what had happened. Maybe it was just one of those things like, hey, we're going to keep in touch with you if you're interested in the job. Maybe he wasn't hired by them, but maybe Dolson or the search firm, whoever it may have been, maybe they had reached out to DeVries and said, hey, if you're interested in talking about the Indiana job whenever your season's over, we'd love to do so. Or closer to the end of your season, that sort of thing. That would make more sense. But at the same time, I don't want to throw out the possibility of the fact that maybe they did go ahead and put things in place during the middle of the season. So, again, I can't confirm or deny either of those things, but it wouldn't surprise me if, either scenario were to be true, or neither of those scenarios. But Steve, I appreciate the comment right there. I really, really do. What else do we need to get in here before we wrap things up? Let's take a look. I already mentioned the transfer portal opening up today. And again, I'll go ahead and do a quick refresh and just make sure that nothing new has occurred since I've started recording the show. But again, I'm sure many of you have already heard me say this once, but I do not believe that anyone other than Malik Renew and Gabe Cupps have already entered the transfer portal for Indiana. And as I'm finished refreshing, I don't see anything new updating right now. I'm sure that will change over the next day or two, the week, whatever. Maybe again, the portal is open between now and April 22nd. Excuse me. That is a 15-day difference from last year, by the way. Last year was a 45-day window, and this year is a 30-day window. Meaning, again, just to clarify, if the window is for putting your name in the portal. If you put your name in on April 22nd, you can remain in the portal until you have a destination. And so if you're somebody who puts your name in now, you can be in until, midway through the summer if you want to wait that long. Not that I'm sure anyone would recommend that, but that's the way that things can work nowadays. But with Malik Renew and Gabe Cupps, what do we expect? I think Malik Renew can probably play at any program that he wants to. So it wouldn't surprise me. I know Florida recruited him very hard out of high school. And I know Florida is one of the best programs in the country right now. I don't know if they'd be interested in taking Malik Renew back, but wouldn't be surprised to see Malik Renew in a Florida jersey next year. And Gabe Cupps, wouldn't surprise me. I know he's an Ohio guy. Doesn't necessarily mean he'll go to a school in that region, but I wouldn't be surprised if Gabe Cupps takes a step down in level to like maybe a mid-major school, just to kind of make it easier for him to earn some playing time. But Gabe Cupps is also a hardworking dude, so I don't know if he would intentionally make things easier for himself. But you still want to make a name for yourself while you still have time, especially now that you no longer have the COVID year. And so, but he did redshirt this season, if I'm not mistaken, after his injury. Maybe I'm wrong. But do wish both of them the best. Malik Renew he only has one season of eligibility remaining, where I do believe Gabe Cupps has 2 or maybe 3 since he was injured this past season. So wish them both the best. I'm not sure what to expect when it comes to players who also may enter from Indiana's roster, but we'll also be keeping an eye on who Indiana may be targeting during this transfer portal cycle. And that's always exciting to keep an eye on. So we'll be doing that over the next probably several weeks, and look forward to seeing what they end up coming up with. And we'll go ahead and wrap things up with a little bit of baseball and softball updates. I know I haven't been keeping up with that as much, just because there's been so much going on with the basketball coaching search. But Indiana baseball, for a while, went on a bit of a winning streak after having a rough start to the season. They did lose their opening Big Ten series to Penn State. They lost 2 out of 3 games, but then they rattled off, what was it, 5 wins in a row? Yeah, 5 wins in a row, including Indiana State. They swept Ohio State. They also took down Evansville. Oh, then never mind, 6 in a row. They defeated UCLA in game 1 before losing their second 2 to lose the series overall. And they'll be back in action tomorrow in Bloomington, Bart Kaufman Field against Bellarmine Knights. And if you want to check that out, it'll be on Big Ten Plus. And then over to softball. Oh, real quick record update. Indiana baseball is currently 13-11. So not ideal right now if you're thinking of having an at-large berth into the NCAA baseball tournament at the end of the year. Indiana softball is continuing their good season so far. They last time we checked in on them, it was a while ago. It was back at the beginning of March. Since then, they swept their games in the Hoosier Classic. They won 5 games there. They continued by defeating Butler after that. They defeated Southern Indiana before dropping 2 in a row, both to Iowa. Then they defeated Notre Dame in South Bend, and then won 2 of 3 at home against Penn State. And then they won't be in action again until this weekend when they travel to Columbus to take on Ohio State in a 3-game series. Currently, Indiana softball sits at, I believe, 22-8. Yes. So much better start for the softball Hoosiers as opposed to the baseball Hoosiers. And hopefully both of them are able to do well enough to make their respective NCAA tournaments. I hate Indiana baseball. I know they had some fairly decent expectations coming into the season. And I know I've said been wanting to pick one of the, the baseball beat writer guys, been wanting to chat with them just to kind of get a feel for where things are at. And I'll still plan on doing that. I just don't know when. Likely, I guess, after all this basketball stuff kind of ramps down, just kind of figure out what's going on with the baseball team. And then, of course, we'll check in. We'll keep checking in with softball as well. So, but with that being said, that's going to wrap up today's edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Of course, as always, subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube if you haven't already. Hit that notifications bell to be notified whenever we upload new episodes. And so, until Wednesday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.